Welcome to Self-Powered Healing. I'm Barbara McNeely, your host and the creator of Self-Powered Healing, where we're talking about how you can unleash your innate healing ability. In this episode of Self-Powered Healing, I have a story for you from a lady named Mari. I published her story in 2020, but it bears repeating. Mari was told before she was even 40 years old that there was no hope for her illness. They couldn't help her. She would never be cured. She might as well just give up and file for disability. I can't imagine how soul-crushing that must have felt to be told she should just give up. But listen in to Mari's story, where she heals on her own in spite of what the doctors had told her. Why don't we start with a little of your story of your health journey?
Sure. That's a huge question. Let's see here. I am in my early 40s, just so we can get an idea of the journey that this healing journey was like. And I remember feeling tired just before graduating from high school. I just thought I was aware I was pushing myself hard. I was a track runner and I was a huge in my grades. So I slept very little. And I was looking for that one day when I would have rest, one day when, and I was always looking forward to my Sundays when I could sleep in. However, when I went to college, I got even more tired and I caught mono and bronchitis at the same time. And I would say at that point, I could say I never felt the same again. I was told that I might have an autoimmune disease and I got tested. It came out negative. But then years passed and I was still tired and I knew something was wrong. We can fast forward about 10 years and now I'm in my, I would say, late 20s. And at this point, I've been diagnosed with IBS. I had been diagnosed with depression and I was taking medication for both. I had 3 specialists working on my body. That included a therapist, a psychiatrist that prescribed medicine coupled with a therapist. I had a gastroenterologist and I had an internist. Also had issues with my eyes at the time, now that I'm remembering. And I had been diagnosed with a very rare eye disease that has resolved. But anywho, I was always taking these steroidal drops. Yeah, it has resolved. I was told by the specialist that in his expertise with a rare disease, that it resolved around age 40. For me, it resolved earlier than that, but I was still having eye issues. So I had those things going on. But the exhaustion just worsened every year. And by the time I was in my early 30s, early 30s, I started to develop migraines and they were getting quite horrendous. And the worst migraine I had was over 30 days, like 34 days. At the time, I was married to a doctor who was able to fill me in with an MRI with a neurologist, which is kind of a big deal. It's kind of hard to get a neurologist appointment right away. But everything came out normal. And I couldn't believe it. At that time, I thought that was extremely painful. I remember by that time of my life, I remember saying very often, I'm tired of being tired. That was like, I think I thought that 1,000 times a day. Like, how can that help me? But I was so exhausted. And then I just thought, part of me thought it was kind of normal. Like I knew it was not normal, but I didn't realize how much pain I was in or how not normal that was until later. And I finally, in 2013, well, let me rephrase that. When I did the migraines, when that migraine happened, I finally started looking outside of the medical field and I started seeing an acupuncturist because I was desperate. I was like, anything to get this headache to go away. And the acupuncture helped. The headache didn't go away, but it felt like a veil was lifted. The feeling that it would go away came into the body. And it did. She helped me significantly with headache. The fatigue, however, did not. I went with her for 2 years. And in that 2 years was fatigue and IBS. I would have experiences, what I called at the time bouts, where I didn't know when, I didn't know what would cause it, but I would have an experience that could last anywhere from 2 to 6 hours of dry heaving and diarrhea and in stomach pains that felt like intestinal contractions. So contractions meaning equivalent to the pain of delivery type of contractions.
Wow.
Yeah, they were very painful. Um, and when I went to the hospital for those types of pain, after all the tests and everything, I would come out like, oh, you're normal. Everything's fine. Minor inflammation. Go see your IBS, your gastroenterologist. And I would see him. I would get the endoscopy, the colonoscopy, and everything would come back normal with minor inflammation. So at this point, I was basically told that I was never going to heal. I was told that I was finally diagnosed at that point with chronic fatigue. So I had now the diagnoses of chronic fatigue, depression, and irritable bowel syndrome. And I was told that I should probably apply for disability and that I would most likely develop an autoimmune disease. And we'll just kind of watch you till you get that. That was 2013. And I remember leaving the office realizing at that point that this was more serious than I had thought, because I was at a point where professionals were telling me that there was no solution ever. I would say that was the turning point for my journey, where I definitively decided that I would never stop trying to find a way to live a life I loved. Yeah.
It's either that or give up.
I knew if I gave up, it would probably worsen. Something in me, like I didn't know it. I know it now, especially with this journey. This journey has become not just a healing journey physically, but emotionally, I'm happier. Mentally, I'm more at peace. And spiritually, I feel so certain that I can trust that I'm exactly where I need to be in the world. And that part of me has always been with me. That part of me was with me that day.
Do you want to talk about what's your turning point, what you did?
Sure. So I proclaimed I proclaimed 2014 the year of health.
Okay.
And that was also the year I divorced. So and it was a big deal because at that point, with the stress of the divorce, I had lost 20 extra pounds, which I did not afford to lose. And it also exacerbated the ability to eat. I came to a point where I wasn't just experiencing bouts, but I was also experiencing the inability to eat without extreme pain. And that was the hard part, because how can you eat when you're afraid to eat? It's almost as if the fear itself was making it not able to. So I proclaimed it the year of health, and I decided that I would do whatever it took to try whatever I could right now. And I started with diet because I thought, well, it wasn't too hard because I couldn't eat much anyway. So I was like, well, I know from what I hear in the world that gluten could be tough for my stomach, and dairy and coffee, which were all my favorite things. And so I took them out of my diet right away. And I dove into articles about, thyroid dysfunction, which was a possibility, and other things that might be possibilities. And I was basically just falling down rabbit holes of what might be a solution. And I came to the conclusion that I was going to hire a functional medicine doctor. The idea that I could see a professional who could go to the root cause rather than giving medication to help with symptoms was what I wanted. So I couldn't find one at first in San Antonio, or even nearby, like even a day trip to, the near area. That resonated with me. At this point, I was already listening to my intuition without realizing it. Mm-hmm. One day I was at the grocery store and I saw this gentleman, and all his groceries, I could see he was on a paleo diet. And my research had gotten me into thinking about what kind of foods I wanted to be eating. So I asked him, hey, are you on a paleo diet? And he started telling me about his wife, started seeing this functional medicine doctor. I got the contact and I went to see him. And he basically, our work together in 2.5 years took more and more food out of my diet. So I was really eating very few things: vegetables, fish, chicken, coconut water, coconut oil. That's about it.
Wow.
And not all vegetables, because we were removing lectins from my diet. So no peppers, no tomatoes. And and I was also eating eggs. So we, despite that, even though that helped at first, it plateaued again. I called those the boss days. His name was Dr. Boss.
Mhm.
And the good news about that was I was able to really listen to my body at that point. I could tell when I ate something if my body was accepting or rejecting. I could tell, I could hear, I could feel digestion rather than fear digestion. And around this time, when it was plateaued, two things were introduced into my life. One, I had seen a therapist to get help with a dynamic with my son. And I told him my story, the divorce and the health and the dynamic with my son. And he says, you're doing pretty good, except all you got to do is work on a little bit about how you're thinking and how you're managing your mind. And I was like, what are you talking about? All these years, I think therapists or any, blog post I might have read, I never got the connection that I could watch my thoughts rather than be my thoughts. And he sent me home with the book called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. And I read that book, and 2 weeks later I showed up with a visual aid. And I was like, the world needs to know what this book is teaching. And that led me into a journey of learning about mindfulness,
Uh-huh.
identifying my values, knowing how to take action that serves me and that supports me. And that's where it led to me becoming a life coach, deciding that would be my career. But at that time in my life, it was more about what is this thing about my mind and how I can use it as a tool. So that was one thing that got introduced to me at that point in my life. The second thing that got introduced to me was a woman who was, I met a woman at my massage therapist's office, and she told me a story about how she got healed by an energy worker. And at the time, I did not believe in anything like that. I thought it was nonsense. And yet I was so desperate that I was willing to try it out. She gave me, especially because of her testimony. And she had a daughter who was rail thin, unable to eat, and pain. And she showed me before and after pictures of a woman who was vibrant, who had meat on her bones. And I was like, I'm going to try this. I, at the time, was already dating my now husband. So glad he's been part of this journey. And he was like, what do we have to lose? Let's try it. I even consulted a spiritual leader in my church because I wanted to make sure that I was within, um, it triggered in me, is this even in my belief systems? So this started to be more of a spiritual journey now, not just a health journey. And because I was on such a strict diet, when she started treating me, quote unquote, for foods that I knew would cause excruciating pain, and then I was able to eat them,
Mm.
I was I was thinking, okay, what is this? Now you have to here's something really important. She never saw me, and it was done over the phone across state lines. So I couldn't believe this. And so you can imagine all the rabbit holes, and I became a
Mhm.
Reiki master. I started studying, like, what is spirituality? What is reality? What is remote healing? You can imagine all those Google search, and then some of them can be really fishy. And so kind of discerning
Right.
what was more. With those two things introduced to my life, not knowing it at the time, it changed everything. And you kind of wonder, was it the chicken or the egg? And I would like to say it was both. The remote healing that that woman was doing was led me on a spiritual path to believe in the power of thought and prayer greater than anything we give it credit for. In the study of like quantum healing, as
Mhm.
well as works like the work of Joe Dispenza, things
Right.
like that was where I was starting to root myself into connecting the two. And the work from Joe Dispenza has a lot of what we're learning from modern neuroscience. So
Mhm.
then I was studying the work of like Richard Davidson with mindfulness-based stress reduction, all the way to the Joe Dispenza that kind of bridges the spiritual gap between what we've been told is reality and what is, for the lack of a better word, woo-woo. That's where now I would say there wasn't a day that I woke up and said, I am healthy now. Today, it just happened. It wasn't quite like that for me. But I will say, I remember one day I was standing in front of the office with my husband's office, and I said, "You know what happened today?" He goes, "What?" "I didn't need a nap today. I actually forgot to even think about planning my nap." And then, of course, then fear hit. Like, well, when is this going to happen again for me? Because that level of energy had not been experienced for over 15 years.
Wow.
And it took a while for me to be in a place of consistency without needing a nap. But for me, it was a reality that this is working and this is my new life.
Your IBS is gone.
I can eat anything. Now, I choose not to eat certain
Yeah.
things now.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I don't eat gluten. Like, I love bread. I make homemade bread. I love bread.
Mm.
But yeah, I eat. I guess it really comes down to knowing not to eat with guilt, knowing to listen
Yeah.
to the body when it's full, knowing that if I decide I'm going to eat a Twizzler, that the body's like, all right, don't eat more than two. Like the listening to where the body
Okay.
says
Yeah.
stop. And and then if there's urges when it comes to eating, then paying attention to the body and not the urge, like
Mhm.
flexing those muscles so that it trains the body to stop the urge. And then eventually it doesn't necessarily go away, but the urges aren't as intense. And maybe with time, urges do absolutely go away. In some cases, for me, I do have absolute urges that have gone away, and others I still work through when it comes to food. But there is great gratitude in being able to eat anything.
Mhm.
Um, but I will say, let me share a story real quick about what that
Okay.
looks like. So recently, I remember having a dinner, recent meaning like in the last 3 months. And after dinner, my husband and I were sitting, we were watching Star Trek Voyager. So we were watching this series, right? And it was our little pattern at the time. And we would sit in front of the TV and watch a show. And I remember getting a stomach ache and I started feeling really bad. And I was like, oh my gosh, and it started cramping. And then, of course, I started to get scared because
Mhm.
cramping was always the precursor of a bout, right? Out being in the bathroom and dry heaving it. So then with the cramping became a little nausea. Started to feel nauseous. And then I was worrying, and all of a sudden I was like, I started, one of the practices of being able to be present with pain is conscious breathing and being in the moment with the pain. So I started to relax in the pain, notice the sensation, and give myself an opportunity to allow relaxation around the pain and talk to myself. I was literally having a dialogue with my body like, hey, it's okay. You have a little stomach ache. It's not what it used to be. And then I had a burp, like literally, I burped and it was a hefty one. And I thought, whoa, I feel better. And then it was gone. And I wondered all those years, how much of it was just digestion, natural digestion trying to be had?
Oh.
And rather, my mind body was creating havoc. And how much of me being able to relax into that one moment months ago allow for the natural process, natural state, meaning not triggering that part of our nervous system of fight or flight. So I remained in that natural state with my mindful practices, and the body was able to do what it naturally does.
Mm.
And so that was an epiphany for me that evening. And I remember journaling on it specifically because I wanted to remember that moment, to know the impact that a thought could have, and that we can be gentle with ourselves as we learn into our new thoughts and our new way of being.
Mm.
Because it is a new way of being. Healing isn't just about our physical ability, it's also who we become when we're able. Once we now have that vitality and that energy, how do we show up in the world?
Mhm.
What opportunities present themselves? And that's where our mind might be addicted to being sick because then we would have to be a new self, and that's scary. It was for me, and it can be for many.
Mhm.
And so that's where this learning process, I see it as using our mind as a tool so we can create a life we love. And that's and it's not that you're going to be loving life all the time, but that it will
Right.
be fulfilled. That we can have it fulfilled regardless of the spectrum of emotions and the array of experiences that occur in life.
Wow. It's amazing. And so the chronic fatigue and the depression are gone as well?
Hmm. The chronic fatigue at this point is gone. Absolutely. Every now and then, if I my when my schedule gets really tight, I'll notice I'll get sleepy. My head gets heavy. And I'm like, "Oh, you're just, pass
It
out. It's okay." And usually what I'll do at that moment is give myself time to go into either a meditation or a writing so that I can get back into that natural state or that space of calm. And it doesn't necessarily feel calm, but what it does do is the meditation will help the, hmm, like shift my brain waves and kind
Mhm.
of it helps me reset. For me, it's a valuable tool. I can get my mind will be frazzled by noon if I don't do a meditation in the morning. It is
Right.
now part of my lifestyle.
Mhm.
So, yes, the fatigue I would say is gone. And when it feels like it's creeping in a little bit, I listen to the body. I sometimes still nap. And yet now it's without the guilt and it's without the fear. It's more like a luxury, and
Well,
I allow it.
naps are allowed.
Well, and you think of the greats, like Winston Churchill and Albert
Yes.
Einstein, they napped. And as
Yes.
a matter of fact, it may be part of the human experience to take a nap every day, or at least
Right.
have a moment, like 20 minutes, where we step back from the work and then go back into
Right.
it. And the depression, if it's gone away, your question on that one
Yeah.
will be sometimes I'll notice patterns of thoughts. I'll feel it before I notice the thoughts. I'll feel really a bit demotivated or in a rut. And sometimes it'll take more than a day. And once it's more than a day, I'm like, okay, what's going on here?
Mm.
And this is where it's using the skills and either it's, writing it out or coming back to my new truth, revisualizing my why, and using those tools to be okay with where I'm at, but yet redirecting the mind to where I want to be in the now. And also learning that it's not always going to be happy, right?
Right.
There's this thing that I just want to be happy. And if that is our goal, it's the unachievable goal. Like the human experience is to not always be happy. So when we're not, knowing that that's just part of the human experience. And when we're not, if it turns into a pattern, then discover where are my thoughts in these spaces so that I can
Mm.
see if it's a pattern that's not serving me or it's a sign. Our emotions are guides. Is it a sign that I'm misaligned with something important to me, a value? And then we can use that as a tool to help shift out of those emotional patterns that may not serve us in a way that is believable, relatable, and doable.
And that is what self-powered healing really means. It's the idea that we don't have to listen just to what doctors have to say. And as long as we keep trying, we're likely to find an answer someday. The turning point for Mari was when she decided that she wasn't going to stop trying, that she would do whatever it took to heal. And I like this that she said in there, healing isn't just about our physical ability. It's also about who we become when we're able. Once we now have that vitality and that energy, how do we show up in the world? And what opportunities present themselves? And that's where our mind might be addicted to being sick, because then we would have to be a new self. And that can be scary. Thanks for being a part of Self Powered Healing. If you enjoyed this episode, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others. You want more? Visit selfpoweredhealing.com. Do you have a healing story? I'd love to hear about it and see if maybe you could share it on our show. If you're interested in sharing your story, visit selfpoweredhealing.com/share to schedule a chat. You're not really committing anything at this point, just having a chat with me. It'll all be confidential unless or until you decide you want to share. And remember, if you can't find a time, let me know and we'll find a time. Your story could inspire others to believe in the power of self-powered healing, to know that they are a magnificent being with powerful innate abilities for healing. So visit selfpoweredhealing.com/share. And always remember this: you are a magnificent being with powerful innate healing abilities.